the icon and my new friend, Matt Pinfield.
So great to be with you, Scott. We've become fast friends, man.
We have.
We were introduced by our friend Michael. We were going to see Michael C. Hall play in his band, Princess Goes to the Butterfly Museum. And immediately, you and I we started talking about music. And then since then, like in a matter of weeks, we've gone out to like shows, lunches. We've just been hanging out nonstop.
I feel like
great.
you're my best new friend. It's crazy. It's funny, Matt. But and we were talking about this. I was talking to someone the other day about that song, All These Things I've Done with the Killers, and you were telling me the story, how that song came about. So obviously we'll get into your history. There's so much to get into. Your stories are unprecedented, from the Bowie stories to the Kiss stories. But this song in particular, because we just heard a snippet of it, tell me how the song came about. All These Things I've Done, an iconic song.
Well, I was doing A&R Columbia Records at the time, and I happened to be like literally on a Virgin train going from Manchester, England to London with an A&R guy over there named Alex Gilbert, who signed people like Biffy Clyro and worked at the label with Damien Rice. And we'd become friends. And I was up there checking out a band he had signed called Longview that were a shoegaze band, from Manchester. I'd gone to see them live, and I ended up signing them for the one album. Then they imploded, but I went and saw those guys play live. And then we got on the Virgin train because I was literally trying to sign Coheed and Cambria, who I ended up signing. And they were playing with Thrice at Brixton Academy, the legendary venue. And so we were trying to get down there on time. And Virgin trains are so slow. There's what I realized is, there's nothing goes out on time on those trains. Right. As great as Virgin was as a company and Richard Branson.
Yeah.
So we were just sitting in the car on the train, and he's got an iPod. He goes, "Hey man, have you heard this band called The Killers?" And I go, No, I haven't. He goes, "Yeah, somebody gave me a burned CD at South by Southwest."
Back when you were burning CDs,
yeah,
right?
when you were burning CDs, right? Early 2000s. And he put his iPod on my head, and I heard Smile Like You Mean It. And I was like, I got to find these guys. Immediately hearing that song. Hadn't even heard Mr. Brightside yet, but that was also part of those demos, part of an EP that came out in the UK. And just listened to a few songs in a row. On Top was one of them. And I really wanted to sign the band. So, I went down to the Coheed and Cambria show, because it was basically, what you hear about A&R with people signing bands was true about Coheed in the States, because there's a feeding frenzy. And I knew that if I went to the UK, I'd actually have their attention. You know what I mean? And they were all fans of, MTV and 120 Minutes. They'd watch me. So on the train, I listened to this, and I get back to New York, to Columbia Records. And all around the same time, I get this letter from the U.S. Army. And they say to me, look, we think a lot of the soldiers, are familiar with you, are fans of yours. They've watched you on TV, that love music and rock. And would you be a part of a mentoring program that we're having for a weekend in Colorado City, Colorado? And so, of course, I said yes. I mean, it'd be a service for the country, and especially all these guys that were going, and women that were going over there and risking their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I agreed to do it. And all around the same time, I finally figure out how to get in touch with the Killers. So I fly to Colorado City, Colorado, and I spend a weekend with soldiers. And some of them are wounded, some of them are not, but they're all musicians. And it was this cool weekend where they were doing like a competition, like Battle of the Bands, and just like talking about music, talking about, ways for them to get, it was just that kind of thing. Just being of service, being cool, And so the next day, I'm there from a Friday to a Monday. Monday morning, I fly to Las Vegas, and I get picked up in the airport by the band's original manager, Braden Merrick, who now owns an independent label called Bright Antenna, and works on that label. And their current manager, who was their lawyer then, Robert Reynolds. It's so crazy how the Vegas connection, because he's the brother of the singer, Dan Reynolds, of Imagine Dragons.
Oh, right.
And then his other brother manages Imagine Dragons. So I was joking, and then he's manages the Killers. I'm like, it's the Las Vegas music mafia, right? You know what I mean? And then you got Panic at the Disco down there and all these bands. So I get there, and they pick me up at the airport in a car. And we go to the drummer, Ronnie Vannucci's parents' house.
Amazing drummer.
Amazing, incredible drummer, incredible guy. I just love him. And they're like set up in the garage. And, at this point, they're pretty much a new band. So they don't have the live show thing down now at this point. And eventually, of course, they become a stadium arena band, and they're incredible live. But they were in the garage, and they were so excited that I was there, and they were doing Smile Like You Mean It, Mr. Brightside on top, somebody told me. And then they go, we got a new song called Midnight Show. We just wrote. We want you to hear it. And that ends up being the last song on Hot Fuss. So after that, they're so pumped that I'm in the house with them.
They were huge fans of yours from 120 Minutes.
Yeah.
They grew up, they probably, like me, they grew up watching that show. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I was so grateful to have that, that connection with them. And then we go to dinner, and it's the whole band and all 4 band members, everybody else, manager, their lawyer. A couple of the West Coast Columbia Records guys come out who I'd worked with for the thing as well. And they're asking me a lot of stories, tell me stories. And it's funny because years later, they end up collaborating with Lou Reed and, knowing Bowie and everybody they wanted to know about, you two. And I had all these stories, which is kind of, I guess, where some of the title of all these things that I've done comes from. But then at the end of the dinner, I literally, I need a ride back to my hotel. And I go, hey, anybody want to drive me back to my hotel? And Brendan Flowers says, I'll drive you back. He holds up his hand. We had a few drinks, and, we were having a good time. So we get in his car. It's an old AMC, right? And at this point, those guys all had these jobs in Vegas where one was, Brandon was a bellhop at a hotel. One of the guys in the band was running urine to test for drugs for sporting events and athletes. The
most random job ever.
Random job ever, right? And then one of the other guys was working at one of the Elvis type wedding chapels. So it was almost like comical because it's like every job. What would you be doing in Las Vegas? And every member of the Killers was doing something like that. And so we get in his AMC car. There's no CD player, just 2 cassettes: Beatles 62, 66, and Beatles Help. He goes, which one do you want to hear? And I said, Help. And then we end up singing the first 3 songs on that album. Help, The Night Before, You Got to Hide Your Love Away, Short Drive to My Hotel, Down the Strip. And we're you could see the joy in Brendan Flowers' face. Brendan Flowers, he was so excited to be with me in the car, and we were just having a great time. There was this really incredible, harmonious moment. And then we get to the hotel, and he comes in and says, you want to come in for a drink? So we go in, and it's it reminds you of a movie when somebody's a couple lonely dudes, at the corner bar, just the bartender. It's a Monday night. It's dead in the
Especially
casino.
desolate Vegas, right? Downtown Vegas is like a ghost town sometimes down there.
It is, exactly. It was so like that, Scott. And so we start talking. I tell him the story about, doing the mentoring for the soldiers that had come back. And, which inspired the line, I got soul, but I'm not a soldier. One of the greatest bridges in a song of all time.
Yeah.
And then I was also talking about kind of where I was in my life. And, I was going through a split with my wife at the time. And I didn't know whether we were getting divorced or separated. There was other stuff happening. And so that inspired all the lyrics to the song. What's crazy is he goes home. I fly back to New York the next day. Or 2 days later, Braden Merrick, their manager, calls me and goes, dude, Brandon wrote the greatest song about you, man. I go, what? I go, what do you mean he wrote a song about me? And he goes, yeah, he wrote a song. He hung out with you that night, and he wrote this song. I think you're going to love it. And so that became all these things that I've done, which is amazing. And of course, I wanted to sign them. It was between, Columbia, where I worked, and Island Def Jam. And the story was, Leo Cohen and Rob Stevenson, the A&R guy, and I'm friends with all of them. I mean, Leo tried to hire me at Atlantic after Columbia had, laid off a ton of us. A new regime comes into a record company.
Every 2 years.
Every 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Your days are numbered depending on, and it didn't matter because I was a vice president of A&R and artist development, and it didn't matter how many hits you had. I mean, there were guys in there with me that, had signed J-Lo and Maxwell, and all of us got laid off at once. You know what I mean?
Crazy.
But, it was unbelievable because they'd come and done my radio show in New York on K-Rock. They weren't even signed yet, and I had them playing on my show. And it was so Leo Cohen was smart enough. Obviously, he started Def Jam with Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin. He knew how close we were getting. So he ended up getting a car for the Killers and bringing them up to his brownstone and going, what do I have to do to be in business with the Killers? And so they signed with him that night. So I got the phone call the next day from Brandon going, Matt, we love you, man, but we signed with Island Def Jam. And, it was disappointing, of course. But
by the way, if you're going to lose out to anyone, obviously Lior is titanic
is a
giant in
legend.
the industry,
Yeah,
so it makes sense.
And I
It
love
makes
and
sense.
respect Leor. We,
Yeah.
we get along so great. And Rob Stevenson's also an incredible guy. And so I congratulated Rob Stevenson. I was like, and there were people at Columbia Records going to me, how can you be nice to those people? And then I literally took the Killers out for a congratulation dinner for not signing me, which people would think, what is wrong with that guy? Right? But I did. We went down to this like tiki bar restaurant on the Lower East Side. And I, just because for me it was, I wore more than one hat because I was also in the programming department at K-Rock in New York, although I could never speak about a Columbia Records because, ethically, I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't, when everybody would raise their hand for a vote on a record to play on the air, I had to keep my mouth shut. You know what I mean?
Right, because you worked there.
Yeah, because I worked there. And that's just, that's the integrity of what you have to do anyway. And so we kept that friendship up. And I remember people saying, how could you still be friends with that band at the label? I go, you got to realize I wear more than one hat.
Exactly.
I'm doing programming and I'm a music fan. Like I love music and I love this band regardless.
That's how I think you and I connected, because obviously, I'm such a huge music fan. I'm a musician. So at the end of the day, like, we met and all we do is sit around and tell stories all day and hang out. And it's great because I finally found a friend who I can go so deep in music. And I will tell you, like, I know you had a show called like Stump. It was like Stump Matt or something.
Yeah,
and
it was
like,
actually, it's so funny because we used to do it on MTV as well as part of like TRL and MTV Live. But it started as one of the first ever internet shows when it was only type.
yeah.
And I like actually literally did it. And it was just an hour and a half of people throwing questions.
Yeah, because I felt like that the other day. We were having lunch with Randy Jackson. I'm like, whatever I can think of, Matt knows 50 times more than I do about this random band.
Well,
so.
no, I still learn stuff from you, and I learn stuff from everybody.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you saying that. But I always had that philosophy, like the minute you think you know everything, and I never ever was an elitist. I never thought, hey, I was when I was younger and I was into punk rock, you were like, you don't know the Clash is, that's different when I was 17, 18, and I was like, you don't know the Clash and the Jam, then that was a little bit of that late teenage elitism.
Yeah.
But I never really carried that into anything that I did, and I'm really grateful because I keep learning. And I love your stories, so we have so much fun hanging out. Like it's the best.
I mentioned this to you before. It's like all your stories one up me, but for good reason, because you've been doing this for decades and you're an icon in the industry. So I'm like, hey Matt, I'm friends with Evan Stanley and Nick Simmons and the Kiss Kids, and I play music with Evan Stanley. You're like, let me tell you about the time I sang with Kiss. I was like, what? So your stories are incredible. We'll get into all that. We'll get into your history. Before we do, though, I do want to take a minute and talk about Taylor Hawkins. Obviously, it was about, I guess, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he passed away. Incredible drummer. I did a teeny little tribute, and definitely not one that, he deserves a much bigger tribute than I had time to do. So I wanted to get into it for a moment, what he meant to you as a drummer, obviously one of the greatest drummers in the last 20 years, incredible drummer. From what I hear, incredible human. I only had the pleasure of meeting him for like 5 minutes once. But what did he mean to you? I know you guys were pretty tight, and I saw a pretty touching tribute that you posted to him.
Yeah, I love Taylor very much. I mean, he, because in those early days of MTV when I was working there, and I wasn't just on air, I was manager of music programming, which meant I was one of the 10 people that actually picked videos and fought for bands. So that if you remember Buzz Clips, that was meant that you got like some major attention on the network, and I'd be in there fighting for bands. But Taylor and I had met up. We were introduced at somewhere out at a bar back when he was like 23, 22, and he was in Alanis Morissette's band, and he'd watch me on TV. So, man, he goes, hey, I love that. You talk about the way you talk about music, and you're really into it. We should hang out. And so what happened was we ended up hanging out every time he came to New York. And I remember, this one time where he's like, man, I can't believe Alanis decided she's going to just sing a cappella at the VMAs. He goes, let's just hang out in my hotel room. So, we were partying. We were partaking. We definitely were. We drank. We did other things. It was always about music with him and I. And sometimes we would go out to bars and find the best bar with the best jukebox. You got to remember it's the 90s, right? Mid-90s. And he and I would just go there, and then we'd just sing songs all night and talk about records. There was this, insane bond we had that way.
Where was the best jukebox that you found?
Well, it depended on where you were. Some people would say Brownies and Hi-Fi, but there were all these different bars. There was even this really weird bar he and I went to that was in the subway station, a Russian vodka bar with this incredible jukebox. And we would you might want to carry us out after the end of the night, but we built this incredible bond and friendship way back then, and it didn't matter if I didn't see him for a year or 2 years. Whenever we would connect or get on the phone or be at an event, it was always the same. It was one of those friendships, you have that. It's deeper, so it doesn't get weird or strange. And he never ever became, that I'm too cool as a rock star guy ever. He was just loved. And the other thing that he always appreciated, and he told me this, like about 4 months before he died, we were down at the Ohana Festival, and he's playing with his side project NHC with
Chris Chaney and Dave Navarro.
Dave Navarro,
Yeah.
right? And so back when he first joined the Foos, I got a call from Brian May, and to write the liner notes in this Queen box set.
By the way, I love how casual you are about that. Brian May from Queen just calls me.
No, which was really cool, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
I would be like freaking out. One of the greatest bands ever.
Yeah,
and I think one of your first and best concerts. We'll get into that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
1976 Night at the Opera was one of my favorite shows I ever saw in my life. My older brother and his first wife took me, and it was mind-blowing. Even with really not great seats at the Beacon Theater, it was all great seats to a 12-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And it was Freddie Mercury and the whole band were just insanely great. And they're playing songs from the first 4 albums, which there was a lot of serious rockers on there.
Yeah.
But they did it, everything. And it was, so I got the call, and they said that they wanted me to write the liner notes for this. They found out I was a big Queen fan for this box set called the Crown Jewels. And that's when there were still CDs, and they're finding ways to, of course, remarket these CDs. Elektra Records in America was the label they were on originally. And then, the time ran out on the licensing from EMI. So then Disney, Hollywood Records, bought the rights to all those albums and re-released
I remember
them.
that, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
So they put together this box set that was like in a velvet box with all miniature versions of the CDs and albums, the original covers. So there was a book in there. So I ended up getting hired. Brian wanted me to write the liner notes. So I did. And I, believe it or not, I'm talking about, I get to one part towards the end of my liner notes, and I talk about rock stars that are fans of Queen. And Axl Rose is in there, of course. And then I put Taylor Hawkins of the Foo Fighters. And he was newly in the band. Like he was only in there, for a little bit. And it just meant so much to him.
Of course.
Like in tears. He was so...
That was one of his favorite bands. I mean, he would sing a bunch of those Queen songs when he would play live.
Yeah, on the last tour he did Somebody to Love.
Yeah.
I mean, he just was... And then he got to, his dream came true. The one thing I can say about the life that Taylor did live is he had an incredible experience of meeting all his heroes, being respected by all his heroes. Whether it's him doing a podcast with Stuart Copeland or playing on stage with John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page at Wembley, singing rock and roll, getting out in front and singing rock and roll, and then also playing with Queen to tie your mother down at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. So he got to meet every one of his heroes, and he was such a kind soul. You know what I mean? He just had that kind of like, I guess it's kind of like you and I too, in that sense that I feel like we still have the excitement for rock and music, all music, that we had when we were 13. I don't know if people would call it Arrested Development, but it's like whatever. It's just that excitement for music, and I still have that every day. I just music is so magical. And he always had that, never lost it. So he was so excited that I gave him the first press in print ever to see his name on liner notes or anywhere was in that Queen box set.
Amazing. Well, the amount of love that is poured out of the music community for Taylor is incredible. And obviously, sometimes when people are living, you don't realize how many people admire them and how much love they do have. But, unfortunately, after his passing, I just realized how many people knew what a great guy he was, what an incredible drummer, and so much respect for him. So, yeah, definitely wanted to do that for a minute. I mean, Matt, your history is incredible. I want to talk about 120 Minutes, how you started. When did you first know that this is the life you wanted to lead? I know you sang in bands.
Yeah.
You DJ'd early on.
Yeah, my first band in junior high was called Thunderhead, and we covered like...
Great name, by the way.
Yeah, it was cool, right? Later on, we found out there was a band called Thunderhead, but they never went anywhere, and it didn't really matter back in those days. It's not like today where we were playing the East Brunswick junior high school dances and the teen center. You know what I mean?
I told you I want to see the pictures of you with like, I don't know if you
I
had
have
like
hair,
the did you have like the hair metal hair? Like
no, like because my hair was never really super thick. You know, as you can see, I lost it eventually. But and I had like there's some photos where I have this one like shirt on. It looks really silly, but I thought it was the closest thing I could find to a rock and roll look.
We all have pictures like that.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny when you're a kid, you know. But you know, we would do Aerosmith and Kiss and Bad Company and Bachman Turner Overdrive, and we even threw in a Roxy Music song, which they were like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I love this tune." That was on Siren called Just Another High. So we were like, but we would play these dances, you know, and do all that stuff. And that was my first band, you know, and it was a cover band. We had like one original song, you know. I mean,
did that ever come out, that one original?
No. I mean, like, there's a live tape somewhere, a cassette of us live back in the 70s recording, which is fun. But it was, you know, and then, you know, I was in bands later, but I always kind of knew that I was the guy who was going to turn people on to music.
Were your parents into music? What was
you
it
know,
like?
my dad sang, but you know, like, but they loved me. So my mom played piano, you know, and you know, I took piano lessons when I was a kid. We couldn't find a good guitar guy to learn guitar from, which was what I really wanted to learn. But
no guitar teachers on the Jersey Shore.
Well, I was like, you know, in Central Jersey, it was, you know, in that Jersey Shore, Central Jersey, I couldn't find them anyway. You know, I mean, I didn't know where to look. I mean, I'm a young kid, but you know, it was. I mean, my parents, like, they literally indulged me in my love for music. How, you know, I don't know if I ever talked to you about this, but, you know, we were a pretty poor family. You know, my parents came, you know, from neither my mom or my dad's fathers, they ever really knew that much. My father knew his dad. He died in a car crash when my dad was 11. And my mother's father, my grandfather, also never knew either of them. He died of strep throat before penicillin.
Tragic.
In 1935, you know, he was like this incredible athlete, and like, you know, he was going to like play professional baseball, basketball. He could do everything. And so, you know, I never had grandfathers, you know, but, you know, my father, on the other hand, was like, we didn't have much money, and he was a school teacher. You know, he was in the Marines, so he fought in the Korean War, right? And then he came back, you know, because he became an officer. Like, he was like one of the best marksmen in the Marines. He won all these awards. Like, he had just insane ability to shoot a gun.
And a crooner. He did all these things.
Yeah, he did so much stuff, you know, and he crooned. Yeah, and he also sang backup for this guy named Frankie Lane, who's like did Mule Train back in the day. My dad like did stuff like that, and but he was like one of those guys who was pretty good at everything. And you know, we didn't have much money, you know, because he was a school teacher. My mom had we had 3 kids in the family, and so they bought a used record player, like this used player that only played 45s. So I only played the 7-inch vinyl singles, and they bought a box of used 45s, and I was probably about, you know, 3 years old. And then my mom would go out with me and buy me these 10-cent singles. So when they were no longer in the charts, you could go to like the corner drugstore, and they'd sell, you know, what was a hit 6 months ago for like a dime.
Right.
So I ended up with like records by the Beatles and the Stones and Motown and all this stuff when I was young. And I was obsessed. They said I just sat in front of this record player and like watched this thing spin around. And like I was, from that very moment, I always wanted to be around music. And so,
and I love the story that you used to even call like local DJs and try and like befriend them, because I mean, I can't imagine like now, let's say you were on the air and someone called you like, hey Matt, do you mind coming down to the local bar to have a drink with me? And that you don't know, because you'd be like, well, I mean,
I used to do that. It's funny, in college radio, I made a lot of friends that way, or people, I'd tell them, come out where I'm spinning. You know, I'd be spinning at this club in New Jersey called The Melody, and then become friends with these people if they were cool, you know, as long as they weren't psychotic and, you know. But
but you used to actually call the DJs on the phone.
Yeah, I would call, you know, because you got to remember it's the 70s. So I would call this DJ, Rich Phoenix, who was they're so beautiful how things come full circle, because when I put out my book, I talked about him in the book that I named after the Killer song. You know, I put out a book, came out in, you know, towards the end of 2016, called All These Things That I've Done, right? So it's named after the Killer song. And I talk about him in there. His name was Rich Phoenix. He was on the local radio station, which was in New Brunswick, New Jersey, called WCTC, you know? And there weren't many outlets back then. You had the New York radio stations, the Philly ones, when you could pick them up. And so there's no way any of those guys were going to answer the phone.
Right.
But, and the music was, like terrible. Like, well, I don't know, terrible, but it wasn't for my age group, certainly during the day. This was like a beautiful music and, stuff that I probably, if it's Sinatra, I love Sinatra now, but as a kid, I didn't want anything to do
What
with
would you say to him when you called him?
I said, hey, mate, hey, I love what you're playing. Hey, can you play this for me? And eventually I befriended him enough that I asked him if I could come to the studio. So New Brunswick was, there's a lot of crime in that town too. There's some bad areas. So
He's like, absolutely not.
No,
Please don't.
No, he let me come. And so I went up to I went there. My parents dropped me off at the radio station and I sat in the DJ booth and it was like this fascinating world to me. Like, wow, you can play music for people and turn them on to music and talk about music. And I just sit there quietly and watch him DJ. And then I would, I remember he would they did records they didn't want, gave them away. So I found a Big Star singles in there. Big Star became such an influential band. I found these Ardent singles that, are probably worth a lot now. But all I cared about was I can find new music, And remember also, my parents, like I said, we didn't make a lot of money. My father was a school teacher, a physics teacher. And so I learned really early that if I wanted music, I had to deliver papers and mow lawns, do anything, feed animals, for people on vacation. I mean, and
taste the athlete's urine and get it tested.
I would have done that. You know what I mean? I would have done anything. You know what I mean? To get records. Yeah. And so, that hunger for new music and discovery started at that very young age,
Wow, incredible. So at a certain point obviously you were DJing, you played in a band, but then you actually start working as a DJ and you became the music director at a station. So talk about your first job doing that and kind of what it meant to you. And then obviously all the way up into your first gig at MTV, 120 minutes and how that happened, which is an amazing story.
Yeah, it was crazy because right out of high school, actually, I was on the Rutgers radio station, WRSU FM. And I truly only took enough classes to stay on the air. It's unbelievable because, it's so nice that they put me in their missions video and there's always stuff about me and alumni. Yeah. And I love Rutgers for that. I'm really considered, it's a flattering thing. But at the same time, my whole goal was to be on the radio, to be a DJ. That's what I wanted more than anything. And then I luckily fell into spinning at nightclubs. So I was, one of the first places I was DJing. Well, first it was a strip club, but, which was, then I learned just what fools they make of the guys that go into strip clubs. You know what I mean? If you're not like a rock star, and I was just observing everything. I learned so much. And I talk about too in my book, but my first gig DJing at a place was called Charlie's Uncle in East Brunswick. And it was a lounge of a restaurant. And it was in the era of new wave, and stuff like that. And so,
and what were you listening to back then? Was it?
Well, I was still listening to everything because I was happy. I felt like music needed a kick in the ass. So punk and new wave I embraced immediately, and post punk. But I still loved rock. You know what I mean? If the bands were good, I still loved AC/DC, still loved Aerosmith, still loved Thin Lizzy. You know what I mean?
But you were getting into the Jam then, the Clash,
Jam,
and all
Clash, Buzzcocks, Generation X, and then
all the good stuff.
Yeah, all that great stuff that was coming over from the UK, and of course Ramones. It's funny the way I bought the first Ramones album. I don't know. You ever told
that was the first record you ever bought?
Well, no, it's the first record. I remember buying it on my birthday. The story about that is funny because there's a guy I'm still friends with today, born on the same day, another short Irish guy, right? But, we were tough, short, scrapper Irish guys from Jersey. And so we liked the same girl. And we were in our junior high. This was around the time I still had the band. And it was our birthday, May 28th. And we got in a fist fight. And it rolled into the bathroom and we both got suspended. The thing was, his dad was a mobster. A total,
you probably don't want to get. You don't want to get in a fight with that guy.
No, we're still friends. Believe it or not, we're actually friends. I went to a barbecue with him when I went back to Jersey last summer. I'm friends with all those guys I grew up with, which is kind of crazy in itself. And so, his dad was like, "What? He's probably proud of him that we got in a brawl."
Yeah.
My dad's like, it's embarrassing for him because it's in the school system he works. I went to school in the town my father taught in.
Right.
Even though he comes from the high school, has to pick me up. And he's like, you stay home here and mow the lawn. And it was my birthday. And as soon as he took off, I was like, fuck that. I'm not doing that. I literally hitchhike up to this record store, Corvette's. It's part of a department store. When they used to have these department stores, that it would be like a Target. And you remember when they sold CDs and everything and DVDs there. But my sister-in-law managed the record department, right? And, and they bust you for like accidentally picking up a pack of gum in those places with their security. So it wasn't like she could steal anything. She'd bring home some album samplers once in a while, which was cool. That's how I discovered Rush and Thin Lizzy and all these bands. But I remember going there on my birthday, having some money in my pocket and going, Debbie, it's my birthday. Is there anything good new that I could buy? And she pulls up this album from under the counter and goes, I hear this is pretty good. And it's the first Ramones album.
Amazing.
And I look at it and I go, 14 songs, holy shit. Because at that point, a lot of records are like, if it's a prog album, it might have 3 songs on one side, 4 songs on one side, And I was like, wow, 14 songs, what a bargain. And these guys look different. They look weird, but I'm down. So I brought home that first Ramones album and never looked back, And so, that was, another important moment. But yeah, Scott, I just continued to love music, and I felt that things were getting a bit stale. Like it's like so many other people that got into punk and new wave, they felt like they were just too far removed from the rock stars. Like, I'm never gonna meet that guy, or I don't. And there were, you didn't really have that much access to them. You had Circus, Rolling Stone, Cream, all these magazines, Hit Parade, or whatever that was out at the time. But
later on, Spin magazine.
Yeah, and later on, Spin, it was great. So which we were so grateful when that magazine came out because it covered alternative music.
Yeah.
Definitely, that's the thing I loved about Spin. So, I'm talking, and when I remember getting Spin's first issue and going, "Wow, what's this?" And so then I got a subscription, But it's wild. So eventually, I'm in college, enough to stay on the college radio station, and then I start getting jobs, looking for jobs to spin at clubs, and I get asked to spin at this restaurant, and so the entertainment at Charlie's Uncle is me and a guitar player who has a little trio who ends up becoming a huge rock star, Richie Zambora from Bon Jovi. Richie and I are the entertainment.
Amazing.
Okay? Like, it's like, and it was,
what was it, a jazz trio? What was he playing?
He was playing like covers, you know what I mean? Beatles. I'm not sure.
He was not playing the best of Bon Jovi.
No, the best hadn't come yet. I mean, I think, he came on like after the first album or something. I remember John and Dave Bryan showing up at this lounge.
Yeah.
And I think they were trying to pluck him at that point.
Amazing. I love Dave Bryan. Great guy.
He is a great guy. Yeah. A lot of times I would go back to Jersey and stay at his house.
Yeah.
And you want to hear another story that's really crazy? This is true. Dave Bryan of Bon Jovi's wife, Lexi, is an old friend of mine.
I know them both very well.
Yeah. And do you know Lexi was a big regular of my club that I spun at, the Melody.
Amazing.
So they built a replica of the Melody in the basement of their house. They have a replica of the club I spun in. You know what I mean? So Lexi always says, she goes, I knew you before I knew Dave. And I love Dave and Lexi. They're so cool. They've been so generous to me. And, I remember I was going through a breakup at one time, and I was like, man, Dave's like, just stay in my place, man. Come down here. You'll be cool. Get out of North Jersey. So that's
amazing.
Cool.
So how'd you get the gig at MTV? Because obviously you became a program director. You were in radio. You started getting awards, which is unheard of. You weren't in a major market.
Yeah.
So for you to win all these awards in sort of a secondary market was pretty monumental at the time, I would say.
Yeah.
And then from what I understand, you sort of pitched yourself to get the job at MTV.
Yeah, it's a really crazy story. I mean, because I had worked at this radio station called WHDG. It was one of the first 15 alternative stations in the country. And these guys put it on the air, which Rich Robinson and Mike Marone. And I had heard about it from a friend. He walked into my friend's record store and said, hey, dude, there's this new station on the Jersey Shore. You should be on. And I'm like, cool, I'll call them. And I found out where they were. They'd convinced the woman who owned it. It was like a mom and pop radio station. Became really important and influential. But they convinced her to stop playing beautiful music on their FM signal and turned it into a free-form commercial rock station, which at that point, it was post-punk new wave. It was a little bit of everything. It was more like what FM radio was when it was starting out, where you played so many different styles and things. So I worked there. I got a weekend gig there. And I would drive through snowstorms. I'd do the holidays when nobody wanted to be there. And I even broke down on the highway in a snowstorm on Route 18. I ran out of gas, and I had to take a walk like 5 miles in a snow blizzard with a gas can on New Year's Day when nothing's open.
Oh my God.
And go back there and get completely frostbite. But I mean, that's paying your dues, right? So I mean, that was the really funny thing about that. And so eventually the owner decided she was going to change management. Rich and I think Rich had left. Mike had already left to work somewhere else. And so they brought in a guy from D.C. and she said to him, like they were looking for a music director, which meant, you were the guy that would speak to the record labels and to the industry. And he was about to give the job to somebody else. And the owner, Faye Gage, she said to him, I think there's one more guy you need to meet. And so I came down and then I interviewed with him and he said, you're going to be the music director. So I got that gig. And that's when things opened up for me because then I was talking to all these label reps about all the new music that was coming out. And they were saying, oh man, this guy like loves music. I think for them it was a breath of fresh air because I was like not trying to be a gatekeeper with attitude. You
were a fan essentially,
a big music fan. Yeah. So I would pick their brains about everything imaginable, and they were like, God, this guy's looking for reasons to play music, not to play it. Right. And so it was, and that was the word around. So within a year of being music director, I won the Commercial Alternative Music Director of the Year award. In 1 year, and it was the first time it was from like a small market, like Asbury Park, and before that it was Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Detroit. And then I won it another year. So I won it back-to-back years, 90, 91 and 92 for the years 90 and 91. And it was beautiful, and I had never expected any of that. But in the process of talking to the labels, I would run into and got to know some people that worked at MTV that were fans of the station because even though our signal wasn't great, if you lived in Lower Manhattan,
you could get it.
If you lived in the south side of Long Island, you could pick it up. So they started saying, hey, look, they became familiar with me and they're like, you mind if we call you up and start tracking like records with you for videos we're getting to find out, if it's real, or if we're being hyped by the labels.
Tracking, by the way, are people responding to the records?
Yeah, that's
people calling. Sure.
Yeah, so
they call you and you become friends with them.
Yeah, become friends with them. And I become friends with this guy, Kurt Staffick, who's the guy's programming 120 minutes. Who's an amazing guy. And I just see in one of these music trades, it says that Dave Kendall, who I thought was a great host, and did 120 minutes, that he was leaving. And I'm like, just for the hell of it, I figured I'd call him up. I go, hey, Kurt, what's going on with Dave? He goes, they let him go. And I go, oh, man, I'm sorry to hear that. What are you guys going to do? And he's like, I don't know. I guess they're trying to figure it out. I go, and I just say this naively, not being cocky, more naive, but just a little the way I thought it should go. And I said, you guys need someone like me who can actually interview bands and knows about the music. So like, and he goes, I don't know if you'll be in the demo, but and, it's funny. I ended up doing work for MTV all the way through like 2014 in some capacity. I would leave and come back and do things like behind this, for like their .coms. And so it's really funny that at that point, before I was on the air like every day, a couple of years later, they would say something like, we don't know if you're in the demo, but he goes, I'll call you in a week, calls me back an hour later and says they want you to come in for an audition. And,
you had no experience at that point.
None in front of the camera. It was like a deer in headlights. I mean, I went in there. I wore a Morrissey Kill Uncle shirt that the labels had sent me with a big rip in it. Like, I didn't even dress well for the audition. It was so... I look back, one friend who went with me goes, dude, you went to that audition with like a rip shirt. It was like, look, it was just ridiculous. And I was a bit cottonmouth, and not from smoking weed. I was cottonmouth from like the nerves. Yeah. And I went in front of the camera and I was like, trying to give him a reason why I should host the show.
Because at that point, 120 Minutes had some of the bands hosting it.
Yeah.
And it was just a different thing, right? They didn't have one host that was really synonymous with the show. And when the bands would host it, sometimes the bands weren't also used to being in front of the camera. So, you'd have these bands that were almost like a bit awkward when they were trying to host it. And then you come in and you're like, all right, let me be the guy.
Yeah, so I did that, and so I did the audition. I think they said it went pretty well. But I didn't, and I waited a little while, and, I didn't expect anything in particular. I was hoping. I did some sample breaks, throwing the videos. I got a phone call. Depeche Mode are coming in, and they don't want to host. Here's your chance to do it. I'm like, holy shit, Depeche Mode, that's so great, because I love Depeche Mode. And I'm like, okay, so I go in. It's when they put out the Songs of Faith and Devotion album. They just had the biggest album of their career with Violator. And it's Dave Gahan and Martin Gore. And I'm doing these breaks. Never been in front of a camera before, but I'm doing like the breaks, introduce myself, do the breaks. And then I'm sitting doing the interview segments with him. And Martin Gore's tired. Like he's kind of out of it, and
partying the night before.
Yeah, I think so. That used to happen many times. I found as I hosted 120 minutes, a lot of bands would fly in and just tear it up in New York City because they're like, we're here. We're no longer in rainy England. Yeah. So they'd come and they'd go nuts. And so sometimes a lot of times we'd have to shoot in the morning because 120 and Headbangers Ball were not the priorities, even though they were the most influential shows they had. But it was like, so it would be whenever there was studio time, it'd be scheduled in. Anyway, so I'm interviewing them, and Martin's looking off, and I'm looking at him going, dude, you're going to destroy my career before it starts. I was like, look at me, please. And I'm just, it was so funny, and I'm like, just sitting there thinking, and Dave Gahan's being great, And I've told this story, but I have to say it again. For years, I would tease Martin after that and go, Martin, man, you almost destroyed my TV career. And he goes, oh, dude, I'm sorry. I go, no, I'm just joking around with you, man. You know what I mean? But I love him. And I've done so many great things with those guys since and been really, fortunate and loved them as people. And me and Dave Gahan became good friends. We used to run around New York City and, do some things, go out to eat.
Some of the bands were not easy to interview. I think you interviewed Oasis early on, too, right?
Yeah, but they were good to me. I mean, what's funny about the Oasis interview, and this is interesting because in the interim, they bring me up to MTV and they say to me, I'm thinking I got the gig, or maybe I got something, because they asked me to come in. So all the way from Jersey. So I go in there, and Andy Schoen, the guy who hired me, who I love dearly, and gave me this International Rock Icon Award in this ceremony here in New York City. Not New York City, in Los Angeles. Literally 2 weeks ago, he brings me in and he goes, I'm sitting in his office. He's the head of music and talent. And he goes, Matt, we thought you were awesome, but we're going to have Louis do the show, Louis Largent. He goes, because, he's our vice president of music and want to give him a higher profile, but we'll use you as a backup. And I was like, my heart sunk. Yeah. But, I stayed in touch. Back then, there was no internet. So, here I am. It's 90s. And I just would every month or so leave a message for Andy just to check in so he wouldn't forget who I was. Yeah.
This is pre-email.
Pre-email and all that stuff.
You'd have to actually call him.
Yeah, you would have to call him. There was no email.
He was like, who's this guy calling me once a month?
Yeah, and so I mean, he probably got 1 million calls, but it was on his call sheet from his assistant. And then eventually, I'm out to eat with the MTV Music Department. They're going to see Green Day at Saturday Night Live, and they said something about a gig, a different gig, and I said I might be interested in that. And they go, "You'd leave HTG?" And they didn't realize I was working like 3 jobs. Right. I was running that radio station. I became program director. But like so many people in radio, it doesn't pay very well.
Sure.
So, I was, working, doing weddings, parties, anniversaries.
You're like, I think I'll leave all those jobs.
Yeah, and DJing at a nightclub, that was really cool, the Melody. But, I ended up getting this interview to be one of the people in the music programming department, which is like insane because at that point, MTV really was controlling pop culture, influencing pop culture, it was breaking artists. It was unbelievable. It was still in the center of the era of grunge and gangster rap and everything. And I went up, I did the interview, and eventually, I got that phone call. And the phone call was funny because, it's a story where we only had like a couple phone lines in the radio station. And I knew they were calling me that day, but I couldn't tell the people in the station, hey, I'm waiting for a call for another job. Right. And there's it's in a house and there's a sales department in one part of the basement, the production people who do the commercials in the other, and the receptionist and the request line. It's all the same 2 phone lines. Oh my God. Imagine it's like your cell phone, but with only those two things. Yeah. And you can't, it can't forward your call. So I wait hours and I'm like, you get, how you get like that self-doubt, and you're scared. And I'm like, he's going to change his mind. He can't get through. He's going to go, oh, hell with that guy. And I thought, and so I get the call and he goes to me, hey, Matt, I've been trying to call you for hours. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, man. There's only a couple lines here. He goes, I'll tell you what, come to MTV and I'll make sure you have more than one line. And that was the
amazing
line. And then I went there, but I will tell you, I never had I didn't think I was ever going to be on the radio again or on television ever again. Like I thought and was satisfied with going there and being a part of programming like what is essentially the biggest radio station in the world and so influential as doing MTV. So being one of the 10 people, picked the videos, works on unplugs and everything else, all those other shows.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the unplugged. I mean, you have so many great stories. I mean, the stories that resonated with me recently when we were chatting, because this could be a 9-hour interview, by the way, but I guess we have to probably condense it to an hour.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Bowie stories, the Kiss stories, and talking about unplugged, we were chatting the other day, and you kind of told me how you got Kiss together to play this unplugged thing, and MTV initially didn't want to do it.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Alex Coletti, who is such a giant in television production, especially in music shows and award shows, and he was the guy who did all the unplugs. Amazingly talented guy who I'm still friends with and do some stuff with. And, he had an office across from mine, right? And you got to remember at this time, I'm not on the air again yet, but he comes in and goes, "Hey, Matt, man, what's with your music department? They don't think Kiss is worthy of an unplugged." I'm like, "What do you mean?" I go, let's go talk to him. So he and I walk down the hallway, and we get into one of my boss's offices, and I go, "You guys don't think Kiss is worthy of an unplugged?" And they go, "Well, does anybody care?" And I go, "Oh yeah, they care." And I put it in numbers. I said, like, well, if every record goes gold without any promotion, that's 500,000 copies. Put that in 500,000 households. That's a great number on the first play for a cable rating. You know what I mean? So that's like, I put it in numbers, and eventually they came around to it. And I give the music department was great, so I give them a lot of credit for realizing that was a great idea. So I was there for that moment when the current version of Kiss was playing, and then Ace Frehley and Peter walking at the same time. They're like standing over behind us, and I'm just watching rehearsals. And I hear, "Hey, you motherfuckers!" And that's, Ace yelling over at the guys at Gene and Paul. And then I watched that incredible experience. And then, Gene and Paul wanted to take Alex and I out to eat and thank us for making it happen. And so we went to Carmine's on 44th Street, and I just picked Kiss's brain about like early albums I wanted to know about. And eventually they did that reunion tour, and then Gene hired me to do the voice of their Second Coming documentary, which is just, that story's crazy. Amazing. Anyway, so funny how, he offered me one amount of money, and then I said, "You got to give me a little more than that, Gene. I mean, it's going to take some hours, and, I want to be part of your history, but not that bad where I
Not a minimum wage.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, but, but ultimately the great thing that happened was one day I had to go fix some lines when I was in L.A., a couple of the lines in the narration. And then Tommy Thayer, who plays guitar with him now, was their day-to-day guy. And he said, "Gene wants to take you out to lunch." So we go out, we have lunch. I get in Gene's Lincoln Navigator that Paul bought him for his birthday. And I remember Gene saying to me, "Man, you really do know a lot about music," which was because we were talking about this band from England called The Move, that Jeff Lynne from ELO was in the last incarnation of that band. And we get to the rehearsal space at Cole's, and Peter and Ace are waiting in the parking lot. And they're kind of pissed. And they're like, "Where the fuck have you been?" And he goes, "Hey, I was taking Matt out to lunch, man." So we're inside there, we're waiting for Paul to show up, and Paul doesn't show up for a while. Guy shows up with their boots they're going to wear for the Psycho Circus tour. So Gene makes me put them on. And like Gene's, like a foot taller than me, and a big man. Maybe a foot, I'd say a foot taller than me. And then so he makes me put them on, and my legs buckle. I almost like break my ankle. And he just looks at me and goes, "Imagine walking around in that for 2 hours a night, 2.5 hours a night." And eventually it comes to him like showing me a bass. We're walking around this room, and I look at the music stand, and I see there's only 2 new songs from Psycho Circus and all the classic Kiss songs. I go, "Hey, man, it's a great set list." He goes, "Oh, you like that list?" I go, "Yeah, I used to sing these songs in a band when I was 14, and it was great." He goes, "You want to have a go?" And so I just like go, "How about Coming Home from Hotter Than Hell?" And Ace looks and goes, "I don't remember it." So, and the next thing you know, they go, what else you want to do? I said, "How about Rock Bottom?" So I sing the song. 3 original members of Kiss are around me. The song ends, and Gene looks at me and goes, "I can't believe how good your voice is. You don't sound like you talk. What else you want to do?" And then Chris yells out, "Do you love me?" Which was surreal because, as a kid with headphones on, it was just the drums and Paul Stanley's voice in the whole first verse. So that was insane. I mean, the whole experience was surreal.
By the way, this is why I can't tell stories around you, because it's just
No,
a story.
you have great stories.
But your stories are incredible. But there's also the Bowie story where you
Yeah.
kind of gave him advice on what to put on the records, right? Which you probably never thought you would be in the position to tell David Bowie, this is what should go on your album.
Well, it was so crazy because the way that I met Bowie finally, after seeing him live as a kid, my girlfriend at the time when I was like a youngster in junior high, her older sister used to date Johnny Thunders. And she drove us and took us because I loved Bowie from the time I was like 12, around the same time discovered Bowie and Queen, and then went back and listened to earlier records. Diamond Dogs was the first one I got, but then I went back and bought Ziggy, Alive Insane, Hunky Dory, all those records. And I remember, at that period of time, I loved Bowie. I went to see him so many times. So when I get in the MTV music department, he's putting out a new record, and Virgin is throwing this dinner. Like, they rent out this place called the Bowery Bar. Not the Bowery Bar.
Sure, I
the
know.
venue,
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
but you know it. So they have the whole back room, and there's tables, and it's like all the people from the label, all the MTV music people. And I meet Bowie that night for the first time and tell him, how much he means to me. And then, they go, oh, Matt, you're gonna sit right in front of Iman and Bowie. And I'm like, I'm so nervous, because this guy's one of my idols. And I know it can go terribly wrong or amazingly right. And I just drink a couple Jack and Cokes to take that edge off.
Right.
And then we start talking throughout the night, talking about Mick Ronson, his guitarist, which we're talking about, like a bunch of things on the records. And I think he was pretty amazed at how much I knew about the history and loved this stuff. And, by the end of the dinner, he goes to me, hey, listen, nobody knows yet, but I'm going out on the road with 9 Inch Nails. He goes, I'm not going to do any singles. He goes, I wonder if you want to help me. Would you give me a list of songs that you think would be great from the albums? And just off the top of my head, I think about, well, Pumpkins recently covered Moonage Daydream. STP did Andy Warhol. Nirvana did The Man Who Sold the World. I started with those. And then I made him a list and faxed it to
Amazing.
him. And then, and then ended up hooking up later on. But it was, can you imagine I'm sitting at this table with Bowie and Iman? And it's all the heads of MTV. It's not like it's just the music department. It's my bosses, Tom Freston, who was the chairman, Judy McGrath, who was the president, and Ben Toffler, who's, and I'm still friends with all of them. Had a great relationship, over the years with them. But man, it was nerve wracking, but it was beautiful. And then Bowie gave me the number, and I was like, thank God this one guy who worked with me, who got hired when I did, Stephen Hill, who ran BET for a while. All right. And he made sure he took Bowie's phone number from me because he knew I'd probably lose it that night. Right? So
it's on a piece of paper or something.
And I went out that night and got hammered because I was surreal that one of my idols asked me. So I went out with friends and we partied all night. And then the next day, Stephen Hill goes, I thought you'd want this. That's why I held on to it for you. And there's Bowie's number, which was just mind-blowing. So fast forward a few years, then I go to shows of Bowie's, right? And around that same time, and he'd come off stage at Radio City Music Hall and go, Matt, how was it tonight? How was the show? I'm like, thinking to myself, you're David Bowie. Of course you were great. And I'm like, when I go, yeah, David, it was awesome. And so fast forward a few years, 9/11 happens. I'm down. I get a call from his producer, Tony Visconti, who worked with T-Rex, Morrissey, A Million People, Thin Lizzy. And he wants me to check out this artist, Christine Young, that he's working with. Says, come to CBGB's gallery. And at this point, I lost my apartment in 9/11 because we moved 2 blocks away 10 days before, and I evacuated with my youngest daughter, Maya, who was a baby then. Now she's like 22. And I remember, at this point, I had like a relocation apartment temporarily in the same building as RZA. So I used to hang out, sit with RZA when we were there, which was cool. You know what I mean? There was a great little Thai restaurant around the corner. And, but we were in this place called, I think it was called the Longacre House. And so I go down to this set and a person taps me on the shoulder and it's David Bowie. And he goes, Matt, man, what do you think about the Ken and Nancy Berry thing? Because they had just gotten, the heads of Virgin EMI had just gotten blown out. And I said, man, yeah, I know it's a crazy story. I go, David, when I was back cleaning out my storage because I had nowhere to live and I was staying in, after we lost our apartment in 9/11, I found this Diamond Dog sheet music book. I go, I never asked anybody to sign anything, but I looked at it that day and wished I had had you sign it. He goes, I'll sign anything for you. I goes, what are you doing right now? And I go, well, I was just going to go back up to my wife and daughter up at on 50th and 8th Street. And he goes, come have dinner with me.
Amazing.
And so I get in the back of a town car, and the license plate, if I remember correctly, says Bowie 1 on it or something like that. And we drive to this little restaurant that he loved in Little Italy, and we go through the restaurant into the back. It was still warm enough. It was like October, after 9/11. Sure. It's like another month or so. And we're out there having dinner, me and him and his assistant Coco, who was with him for years since Aladdin Sane. And then Tony Visconti and Christine come, and we're
amazing,
just sitting there. And then David says to me, hey, I got this new album. I'd love to hear your opinion on it, get some ideas. Show up at Looking Glass Studios. So Looking Glass is named that because Philip Glass, Einstein on the Beach, and Bowie, he had a room in there. Tony Visconti had a room in there. And I meet Bowie, and I go to, it's amazing. Like, I get there, and it's just Bowie sitting in this one little side room, and I walk in, and just me and him, and he goes, man, I got to tell you, I can't believe that Interpol, and I'm not talking about the band, I'm talking about the organization, found outfits of mine that were stolen off stage during the Aladdin Sane tour in Portugal.
Wow.
He goes, someone was trying to sell them. I want them back. They're mine.
Of course, yeah.
So he was so happy, Bowie, that they had found these outfits that were robbed from him. And then, Mick Rock showed up, who were both, you and I both became friends with.
Yeah.
And I love Mick and Tony. And it was kind of like this reunion of the three of them. It was unbelievable to witness that. I mean, Tony had obviously produced the record, but having Mick back in there.
And Mick was such a character. He'd be like, bend over, baby. You're right, babe. How are you?
You know what he said to me once? He goes, Matt, you're a fucking lunatic, but a lovable lunatic. That's what he called me.
It's one of his famous lines, for sure.
He's unbelievable, And so, we listened to the album there, and then I get the call from, Bowie says to me, hey, I'd really like to, spend more time with you with this thing. Just get some ideas on maybe some remixers or, because at this point I was doing A&R at Columbia Records. So I was doing A&R, and plus he knew how into his music I was, and
of course,
familiar with things that were going on. So I'm in the Hit Factory, a recording studio, visiting Steve Thompson, who had actually worked on some Bowie records and, mixed Appetite for Destruction, one of the guys that mixed that record. And I wanted him to do a demo. I did a demo deal with some band, and I wanted him to produce it because I knew he produced and mixed. And we were friends, so I figured he'd give me a good deal because what Columbia would give me so I could record these tracks. And the phone rings. It's my cell phone. I'm standing over one of the soundboards, and I answer, and I go, hey, Matt? I go, yeah. He goes, David Bowie. And I'm like, David, how you doing? And he goes, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? And I said, well, I got the label lunch, we do our label lunch for all senior directors. And I go, did I just say to David Bowie, I can't see him tomorrow afternoon? What kind of idiot are I? Well, I felt like I was such an idiot at that point. I'm like, I can't believe I just said that to him. And then he goes, well, what about Thursday or Friday? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm good, David, whenever you want. He goes, I'm going to have you come to my place, and I want to spend some time with you, play the album again. And so the amazing thing was that day comes, I go to his place. We're sitting on couches across from each other, but very close, And Coco, his assistant, is playing the album, and she's literally taking notes in the corner on a notebook of the things we're talking about. And the most amazing moment in my life, or one of those moments which you're like, man, I can't believe this is happening. And I look back now and say, did this really happen, or was this in a metaverse or some kind of other universe? But Bowie looks at me and says, I really appreciate so much your knowledge and love of my music, and I think it's amazing, and I just wanted to. And I looked at him and I said, David, you're the reason why music discovery became even more important for me, because when I discovered your music, I realized there was a whole nother world out there.
Of course.
And that's when I found Lou Reed and Martha Hoople and a million other things, Roxy Music. And, so, it was unbelievable. So we listened to the album again, excuse me, in its original form. And then Coco goes, David, I think you should play those 5 songs for Matt. And he goes, I don't know. That's all right. I go, David, you got to play those songs for me. So, and I at this point I was kind of fearless. I mean, I don't know, because I'd already became comfortable with it, even though it's all surreal in retrospect in every way. And So she puts the songs on. The first one is I've Been Waiting for You, which is the Neil Young cover on Heathen. And he goes, what do you think of this? And I go, David, you got to put it on the album. So he, then he starts like, sitting there. Then he gets up and gets a cigarette. And he starts pacing out and going out on this, like, patio, like courtyard, you know what I mean? Like, garden, thing. And he's like pacing and coming back and plays me Slow Burn. And I go, he goes, no, what do you think of this one? And I go, David, man, you got to put this on the album. And he's like, so he started to like a little bit of second guess. He's like starting to wonder. And he's again, chain smoking, walking back and forth. And I'm sitting there. And then he plays me Everybody Says Hi. And I go, he goes, now what about that one? I go, David, I don't know what to tell you. I think this should be on the album. And so at this point, he's really starting to second guess himself. He gets to a fourth song. And he goes, now what do you think of this? And I go, B-side soundtrack. And he goes, whew. And he like wipes his forehead. It was the funniest thing ever. And also surreal. And the fifth song, I said the same thing. I said, this is good for a soundtrack. And, I don't take full credit for it, but I will say I got him thinking because he changed out those 3 songs, put them all on the album. Took songs
Amazing.
off, which is unbelievable. So, I mean, that was unbelievable to me. And on the way out, he said, I know you're friends with Scott Weiland. I know he's struggling, man. I will talk to him if he, so it's just
surreal.
It was surreal.
Yeah.
Because Bowie was like all our heroes.
Of course. Well,
Steven Tyler and Aerosmith, like guys when we were kids, were like, all we saw was the album covers and the magazines, the pictures.
Yeah.
And if you got to go to a concert, and sometimes you'd have obstructed view. Like you'd go, I am going to see Aerosmith. But you're sitting behind the curtain, not watching them.
Why did they sell those seats behind the stage? What a strange idea.
Back then, it was Ticketron before it was Ticketmaster.
That's crazy.
I
was gonna say my Bowie story. I worked with Amon and managed Amon for many years, and my only Bowie story is that she introduced him to me. She's like, Scott, this is David, and then she moved him away. I was like, I've been working with you for like 15 years. I only needed 5 minutes with the guy, give me Anyway, it's crazy. Matt, your stories are, as I said, unprecedented. We could do 7 of these episodes, and I think we're going to do a lot more of this. But we didn't even talk about Farm Club. We didn't talk about what you're doing current day. So last but not least, take me up to speed. You got a new show. It's on KLOS. You're breaking new music.
Yeah, it's a rock show. It's called New and Approved. It's Sunday nights on KLOS. I'm also doing a show with DWP, Danny Wimmer Presents. They are like the premier, one of the biggest concert promoters Danny is in the entire country. He does like Welcome to Rockville, Bourbon and Beyond, like Louder Than Live, Aftershock. I started doing a Twitch show with him, which is fun. So I'm doing this thing where I, do like a video countdown, but it's more on the rock, full-on rock edge of things. Because I still listen to all kinds of music. I mean, I listen to R&B, soul music that's good, I listen to alternative music, obviously, and I'm always trying to find something in every, but this is like I'm more on the rock and hard rock side of things, but I love it, and I'm having a great time. So I'm doing this video thing for him, which at the moment is called Pinfield Power Hour, which is pretty funny because it's 2 hours, number one. It's on Twitch, 3 to 5 Pacific on Fridays, and it's literally Twitch is something that I had to like comprehend and understand,
sure.
And it's all about the chat, but the show on KLOS. New and Approved is a great show. Like I count on the 10 biggest rock songs in Southern California for the week, and then just interview everybody. It could be Royal Blood, it could be Angus Young, it could be Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam, it could be Mike Campbell from, it's just, So I do these interviews, and then I do album anniversaries, and then, I also have the syndicated show I've been doing for years that's on like 110 stations in the U.S. called Flashback, which is a classic rock history show, and it's been going for almost 11 years or 11 now. It's crazy.
Amazing.
So I keep busy, and I do like live streams when I get hired to do them. I got to do some great things like Rock in Rio where I hosted every night, and they didn't even let the people from Brazil on the stage, and I got to go out on stage for that thing. And I zip-lined across the crowd, which I was challenged to do, which is insane. I was so scared climbing that tower that all the extreme sports guys do, and I zip-lined across the main stage, the crowd.
Amazing.
And then, it got over my fear of heights, and then I skydived like last year when I got sober, since I've been sober almost 2 years now. It's like 2 years. It's going to be 2 years. So I decided I would just do all these crazy things and not abuse myself. just find a different way to abuse myself.
Sure, sure. Well, this is one of many we're going to do. So this is not the first. Like I said, we could do hours of this because I love just chatting with you and hanging out with you. And as you always say, one of many to come. So this was so great. By the way, check out Matt Pinfield on all forms of social media. We follow each other on Instagram.
Yeah.
You have 2 Instagram accounts. So
well, one of them's not really. Here's really funny. I want to clarify. The one that says The Real Matt Pinfield is from the old radio station I worked at, KFOG, that no longer exists in San Francisco. So you'll notice there's no post on there. So it's Matthew Pinfield.
Matthew Pinfield.
On Instagram. It's Matthew Pinfield on Facebook. And it's at Matt Pinfield on Twitter. So.
And check out the KLOS show. Yeah, we will do many of these because you are my new friend that I love hanging out with you.
I love hanging out with you, Scott. We have the best time. We just go out to eat and hang out, and we go to shows together. Yeah. We see great music, and which I love doing with you, and we just we've been having the best time.
Yeah. Many more to come. Hey, man, such a pleasure. We're going to go out to eat right after this.
Yes,
so,
we are.
There you go.
We got to continue our, we're on a tour of restaurants of Los Angeles. We're going to do it.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. The best. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Scott. It was great to do this with you, man. I love this. I mean, it's just been so much fun hanging out with you. It's such a great podcast. Gotten some incredible guests. And I was honored that you asked me.
Of course. Well, listen, there's 10 parts of this coming up. We're going to do many more of these. So I'm honored that you came on. It was such a great hangout. And I can't wait to do more. So I wish this show wasn't an hour. We should do the 3-hour Matt and Scott show. But we're going to talk about that at lunch right now.
Yeah, we'll do something cool like that. I'd love that, Scott.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, my brother.